and we'll tell you right up front that it's going to be hard to swallow at first.
Well, there's several, actually 9 flying saucers, flying discs that are out there of extraterrestrial origin.
It just left a seed in my mind. I think at least one of them was part of an archaeological dig. So it's old. At least one of them is old. I don't know if it was the one I worked on, but I remember something to do with an archaeological dig.
Well, I am telling the truth. I've tried to prove that. What's going on up there could be the most important event in history. You're talking about contact, physical contact and proof from another system, another planet, another intelligence. That's got to be the biggest event in history, period.
And it's real.
And it's real and it's there.
I placed a call to famed aviator John Lear because he'd been telling me he knew someone who'd been hired to work at an ultra-secret military base near Groom Lake. We had no idea the interview would still be of interest 30 years later.
There's really no way I can prove it without revealing my identity and getting myself into more trouble than I have already.
Exactly what's going on up there?
Well, there's several, actually 9 flying saucers, flying discs that are out there of extraterrestrial origin, and they're basically being dismantled. Some are, well, in various stages of completion, built from other parts, and they're being test flown and basically just analyzed.
It travels in almost the same way microwaves travel. This is essentially applied to the gravity amplifiers, and by means of the electric current also provided by the reactor, it's amplified and focused. The amplified signal is shifted slightly out of phase, and by virtue of that they can repel or attract a gravitational body. The craft can take off on one gravity amplifier. There are 3 in this particular craft. When it's using just one amplifier, essentially pushing away from the Earth, it's known as Omicron configuration. For space travel, the craft will rotate up on its side, face the 3 gravity amplifiers at the target. They'll focus down on a single point some tremendous distance away, and the amplifier and the associated and the associated reactor will be run up to full power, and they essentially pull the fabric of space, distort space and time toward the craft, so they can traverse a tremendous amount of distance in virtually no time at all. They're not traveling in a linear fashion. They're essentially bending space, and space, the fabric of space essentially, and gravity and time are all interlaced. When you start distorting gravity, you distort time and space along with it. And these aren't theories. We've known these for a while. We just have no way of controlling them. But apparently this civilization has found out how.
South of a dry lake bed known as Area 51 is a place known as S4, allegedly home to a super-secret government research facility. In the course of our investigation, we found a scientist who says he used to work there. Robert Lazar was shocked when he first discovered what it was he would be working on.
I got out of the bus. I was told to walk directly through the hangar, and immediately, even before entering the hangar, you can see the edge of a disc. This is your classic flying saucer, 2 inverted pie plates, if you wish, with a segmented, larger area dome on top. Within minutes of that, I finally realized that this had nothing to do with something the government was producing. And it was quite shocking because everything inside was small. This is a full-size craft, 30, 35 feet in diameter, maybe 40. But you're looking at seats that are, 18 inches off the ground, obviously made, for something smaller. And certainly wasn't made for children to play in.
Lazar says there were 9 spaceships in all, and he claims to have seen one fly.
It began to lift off the ground almost silently. There was a hiss sound, like a corona discharge if you hear around high voltage systems, accompanied by a faint, it probably would have been brighter at night, a faint blue glow around the bottom. As the craft approached about 30 feet, 20 feet, something like that off the ground, that corona discharge disappeared. The sound stopped, and the craft stood there silently and slowly drifted over to the left and then to the right.
The government denies they're testing alien craft at S4. Lazar no longer works there and nowadays spends his time working on one of his hobbies, jet car racing. He alleges that after he went public, security officers at the base threatened his life. He also says that his employment and military service records have disappeared. Despite repeated requests, the government can't find them. The subcontractor who hired him for the job at S4 refuses to comment.
Well, I had met Ed Teller at Los Alamos one day. We had a brief meeting and a talk. I had shortly thereafter moved to Las Vegas and basically left the scientific community to do other work. Sometime later I decided to re-enter and send applications out to several other national labs and also one to Ed Teller, and he gave me a call and he said he might have something that I'd be interested in and suggested that I go for an interview. Shortly thereafter, someone from EG&G called and told me to come down for an interview there. They made it very clear that EG&G had nothing to do with it. They were just using the building as a place to do the interview. After a short time, they said I was basically overqualified for the position, but they may have something else in the future. And I don't remember how much time lapsed after that, but shortly thereafter, they asked me to come down for another interview, and they said this was involving, I don't remember their exact wording, but they led me to believe it was a field propulsion system, and of course I thought it was something that, in secret, that we were working on. Later, only did I find out that it was, a back engineering program dealing with alien craft. I flew out of Las Vegas McCarran Airport, and I flew to Groom Lake in a 737 aircraft. We land at Groom Lake, and there's a bus there that drives about 15 miles south, approximately. I'm really not sure exactly how far, down to a smaller dry lake bed known as Papoose Lake. And right up against the side of the mountain is the S4 installation.
And what happened to you first when you entered it? How did they receive you?
It was very military-like. It was certainly not a scientific atmosphere. Very high security. Everywhere you walked, you had to have an escort, an armed escort, even into the bathroom. All doors lock and open with your badge, and it was a very oppressive atmosphere.
Project Looking Glass dealt with the distortion, the fact that there's a time distortion, essentially looking back in time, and by that I do not mean looking back years ago to see the wagon train days. They're looking for distortions that are milliseconds in time, and what that was used for, I don't know, but that was just observing the time, the time distortion, time dilation phenomena of the craft in operation.
What is element 115? Is it found here on Earth, or is it strictly an extraterrestrial material?
115 is strictly an extraterrestrial material. It probably occurs naturally in some other places, maybe other star systems. Some people not familiar with science or chemistry say, well, that's ridiculous, all the elements occur on Earth, but that's not true. There are elements on the periodic chart that aren't found on Earth. I believe the Heavy Ion Research Lab in Darmstadt, Germany, has reached element 112 recently. So 115 isn't that far away. And when they synthesize it, it's not like they're making a couple ounces of it. They're talking about 1 or 2 atoms of it. To make any usable quantity of a heavy element like that is virtually impossible. Element 115 is in the top of the reactor. And the base of the reactor apparently is a small, something similar to a cyclotron. It's a particle accelerator. A particle is accelerated to high speed and then deflected up a small tube, and it's aimed at the 115. This transmutes the 115, similar to the way we do that in a normal particle accelerator. This causes a reaction, a radiation emission that we really haven't seen before. it produces antimatter. This antimatter is guided down a tuned tube and reacts with a gas. When matter and antimatter react, they convert to 100% energy. This energy is converted, heat energy, is converted to electrical power in the reactor itself. This is done through a thermoelectric converter. And this electrical power is used to power other subsystems on the craft, though there is no wiring, you know, as we would know it. Also, that's almost a byproduct of the reactor. The reactor also sets up a gravitational wave from the 115 being bombarded. This gravitational wave is present at the top of the reactor and is essentially guided in the same way microwaves are guided, through tuned tubes. And this goes to their amplifying cavities and through the projectors that are in the bottom of the craft.
With the gravity generators running, is there thermal radiation danger to the crew?
There is no thermal radiation while the reactor is running. The thermionic generator is 100% efficient, which is in violation of the first law of thermodynamics. But in fact, it works.
In 1989, I met Robert Lazar, and the story he told me was an incredible one by any standards. I thought that if, in fact, any of this stuff checks out, it may be the biggest story in history. For myself and the TV station, the key to his credibility, the key to his story was always Los Alamos, because if he worked at Los Alamos, if he worked in classified projects, it is at least conceivable that he would have been brought to Nevada to work in other classified projects. As a test on his veracity, we wanted to go to Los Alamos and have him show us around. He said, I can get you in. That, yeah, we'll believe this when we see it. So we were there on a weekend. Fewer people are in the lab, and Bob, in fact, did take us in. And it was like following him through this labyrinth of different labs and facilities, and he knew his way around like a rabbit in its own burrow. He knew where everything was, and that impressed me, because how would he know if he hadn't been there? Los Alamos was uncooperative from the first day. Years and years went by, and I still couldn't get any confirmation from them that Bob had ever worked there. It makes no sense. They'd have no records on someone who worked there just a few years before, but that's what they were telling me. Now, I had interviewed other people that work with Bob there who say that he was an employee, he was a physicist, and he worked in classified projects. If that were the case, where are the records? Because to this day, we still can't find them. What this tells me is that someone has tried to wipe out Bob's background so that fewer people will give him any credibility.
What we used to do is we used to drive to Los Alamos from here. It was a 16-hour drive, and Bob had a friend there, and it used to take us like 24 hours to rebuild all these Alpha Pros. There was like 300 of them. And we'd clean them all up and then rewire them and then put the aluminum tape on them, and then we drive back to Las Vegas. What's an
Alpha Probe?
They scan for radiation of the people that go in and work in Los Alamos.
Oh.
And Bob had the contract. So we did that about every 6 weeks.
Checking out Lazar's credentials proved to be a difficult task. He says he earned degrees in physics and electronics, but the schools we contacted say they've never heard of him. He also said he worked as a physicist at Los Alamos National Lab, where he experimented with one of the world's largest particle beam accelerators, a half-mile-long behemoth capable of generating 700 million volts. Los Alamos officials told us they had no records of a Robert Lazar ever working there. They were either mistaken or were lying. A 1982 phone book from the lab lists Lazar right there among the other scientists and technicians. A 1982 clipping from the Los Alamos newspaper profiled Lazar and his interest in jet cars. It too mentioned his employment at the lab as a physicist. We called Los Alamos again. An exasperated official told us he still had no records on Lazar. EG&G, which is where Lazar says he was interviewed for the job at S4, also has no records. It's as if someone has made him disappear.
Well, they're trying to make me a non-person.
Explain. You called where?
Well, the schools that I went to, the hospital that I was born at, past job, and essentially nothing comes up with my name in it.
He smiles, but out of futility, knowing the whole thing must sound ridiculous. According to Lazar, his employer was the United States Navy. He says he and other government employees would gather near EG&G, fly to Groom Lake, then a very few people would get into a bus with blacked out or no windows and drive to S4.
When you get off the bus, what do you see? It's a very interesting building. It's got a slope of probably about 30 degrees, which are hangar doors. And it has textured paint on it, but it looks like sand. It's made to look like the side of the mountain that it's in, whether it's to disguise it from satellite photographs or what.
Reporter George Knapp was able to track down a few of Lazar's colleagues who could confirm parts of his story. But when they talked to Knapp, something strange happened.
One after another had visits from government personnel who basically intimidated or told them to back off, followed them around. There didn't have to be any direct communication where an agent says, you keep talking to this guy, you're going to end up in a river. The message was very clear.
Seems to me that Mr. Lazar's problem is of an emotional disturbance nature, really much more than the criminal nature. I've been reading everything here, and I agree with, in spite of what you say, Mr. Lukens, I think that that it is a substantial penalty that he has, in fact, been convicted of a felony. I have letters from Dan Stegman, who was surveillance manager at the Sahara and Hacienda Resorts. I have statements from George Knapp. I have reviewed the material from Mark Fierro, from Mr. Bilbray's office. I'm impressed with all of that. I note that although it doesn't show a lot of income, we do have a W-2 form of record that shows that he worked for the United States Department of Naval Intelligence.
Very important point. Why did you went public with the information?
When?
Why?
Why? That's, again, a complex question. It's not just one reason. There's several, stemming from many things. Harassment, to protect myself. The fact that this information being contained is also unfair. But there are many, many reasons.
After you went public, did they try to silence you in any way?
Oh, in every way. Yes, I was shot at while getting on the freeway here in Las Vegas. Friends were harassed and taken out of work that knew me. Many things happened.
Now, I did give my permission to have, as part of the, security clearance process, I gave written permission to have the phones monitored and things of that sort. So they weren't doing any covert stuff. They, with any Q clearance, or which is civilian top secret clearance or military top secret clearance, they go talk to friends and, places you've been, make sure you're not connected to foreign countries. But, monitoring your phone is nothing unusual. However, they insisted that, you don't even talk to your loved one, to your partner, to your wife, whatever, about what's going on. So she was essentially in the dark and didn't know the phone was being monitored. Well, part of the security clearance is that not only do you not have any connections to foreign countries and aren't a maniac, but you have to have a stable home life too. Well, she started having an affair with a flight instructor. Now, they were monitoring this on the phone, and they knew it and I didn't. So they stopped me coming in, and their attitude at the time was, we need to see how this is going to play out and if Lazar is going to get a little weird or anything. So let's just, hold him off from coming in and, see what happens.
And they explained this to you, what was happening?
Well, after the fact, yeah, because time kind of went on and there were guys that were following me around. And I started getting a little concerned going, well, shit, are they booting me out of the project? And if so, they're not just going to let me hang out at home and go get a new job knowing what I know. So as time went on, I started getting a little concerned, and I took my closest friends and just kind of got together. And I said, hey, remember that job I told you about? This is what's going on. And like, you don't need to take my word for it. Wednesday night, we need to all go out here. I want to show you what's going on. So I took everybody and we went out to, remember, since I had the test flight schedule, and went outside the base, out into the desert, and so everybody could see, you know, one of the high performance tests. And, you know, it left quite an imprint on everybody, so they knew I wasn't.
And there's videos
crazy.
of these tests, right?
Yeah, but remember, this is it's in the dark in the 80s with a big monster-sized camcorder, and you got, you know, a bright light jumping around. But, yeah, I mean, we did video of it, but there's no, by today's standards, it's, as you probably know, with all high security clearances, you have to have a stable home life, too. Well, there were things going on at home. They had my phone line monitored, and I was a candidate for an unstable family life, as they called it.
Did they try to label you as nuts?
No, not nuts. They, in fact, wanted me back in the project very badly, but they didn't know if I was going to be too stressed out to keep things quiet, and I started getting concerned when we started getting followed every place I went to. That's the only time that I finally started telling a couple friends, hey, if I disappear, this is what I was doing. And when I took them out to the site to show them.
Good evening. This is John Lear, and today is March 22nd, 1989. We're standing just about 8 miles due east of Groom Lake, Nevada, the super government secret test site. And just a few minutes ago, we saw one of the government extraterrestrial UFOs fly over there. We all watched it for about 7 or 8 minutes. Right here I have my Celestron scope. It's 8 inches. And I had it focused in for about 15 seconds and saw for myself that in fact it was a disc. We're going to stay here for another couple hours here to see if we can show you folks an actual extraterrestrial flying saucer being flown by the government. So if you just stand by, and we'll be looking over that mountain, which is where they are. They also come over here, which is over at Bald Mountain. There's some lights over there which you can't see, but there are a number of trucks. We don't know whether they're looking down here or what they're doing up there, but we managed to get in here. We're standing on public land. It's completely legal where we are. And if you'd like to come here later in the show, we'll tell you exactly how to get here.
Well, you can mention who's with you, John.
We have Bob Lazar, and we have Jackie Lazar, Bob's wife, and we have Gene Huff. And this mission was organized tonight by Bob Lazar, who is a theoretical physicist who works at Groom Lake.
And is also a dead man at this point. We're having this on film that he wrote.
Yeah, right. I'm happy.
You want your name on there that you're a physicist. We're out here with the late Bob Lazar.
Damn it.
Okay. Good luck. No, what? Did you see that move it did?
No, I didn't.
It went like it went boom, boom. Wow, look how bright it's getting. Look at it now. It's getting bright. Not bright enough for me to get the son of a bitch.
Here, hold on, right here. Are you there?
No. It is bright right now.
Essentially separated from reality, as crazy as that sounds, with being encased its own gravitational envelope. Inertia is not going to affect it. And, you know, this is how some of those recent sightings with Commander David Fravor, I'm sure you've heard of the Tic Tac UFO. I mean, he describes exactly, the thing operates exactly the way I was describing. That's why he was interested to talk to me. But we saw this, and, you know, on the way home, it's like, hey, we got away with it. We should try it again the next test flight date. So this became a thing to do. And I think it was on the third time that we got caught. I mean, we started becoming a little careless. I think we took a motorhome out there. And, you know, I mean, it was like the stupidest thing you could possibly imagine.
Started tailgating.
Yeah, it was ridiculous. And
again, you're in your 20s.
Yeah. And, you know, what was funny was we went out there, and my friend Gene Huff and I were leaning on the front of a vehicle. And just for some reason, we just started talking shit. Like, well, I hope they realize that I don't remember what we were saying, but you know, that it's something about attacking the base or something along those lines and stealing the craft or something like that.
Something crazy.
And then about 20 feet in front of us, we see a little green light fall on the ground and roll to us. And unbeknownst to us, now it's pitch black, you can't see your hand in front of your face. There were a bunch of guards standing right out there, and they had a night vision scope where they were like from here to the wall looking at us, listening to us, and the guy dropped it, and the scope rolled over to us, and you could see the green screen. You know, we turned the lights on, and all these guys are there. So it was,
whoa.
Yeah, yeah. So we did incredibly stupid stuff and got caught, as we should have.
So when they catch you and they bring you in, then what happens?
Well, I went in for debriefing. The following day, I went to Indian Springs Air Force Base, which is kind of a defunct base that they used to use at the nuclear test site. And this is when they brought out the transcript of the phone call with my wife. And, you know, they sat me down and we said, you know, when we meant to keep the secret, we meant you can't tell your friends, right? You know, and it just being sarcastic and trying to, and then they got real serious. But this is where they, you know, took the transcript out and were reading me what my wife and, you know, our friend were talking about. And I don't know, it was a hard time.
So what happens from there? What do they do with you? Why don't they arrest you?
I don't know. I don't know why. I'm not sure exactly they knew what to do, but they did let me go that night, and I went home. And this is kind of when the most stressful part started.
Because you're realizing that you're being monitored.
Yeah, now,
24/7.
yeah, now I know not only am I being monitored, but now I know I'm in trouble. And it wasn't a short time after that that I contacted, you know, at that time, the only investigative reporter I had heard of in Las Vegas was George Knapp. And, you know, told him some of the story because I had no idea what the hell was going to happen at that point.
So George Knapp.
In what way did they try to make sure that you kept your mouth shut?
Everything up to death threats. I mean, constant reminders of it, signing away my constitutional rights for fair trial and that sort of thing.
And since this thing has, your phone's been tapped, you believe?
Yeah, I believe.
Do you know?
I have a tap detector, and just occasionally after I pick up the phone, you know, a little red light goes on.
And the reason you came forward with the information to begin with, is it related to the fact that they were bothering you?
Yeah, it was essentially to stop that. And what had happened was I sent in a request for my birth certificate, and as it turned out, it wasn't there anymore. They said I wasn't born at the hospital, and that kind of got me wondering what was going on. So I put in a request for some other information, previous jobs, and you know that was also gone. And I thought something had to be done before I disappeared.
But the same thing, Los Alamos, they've never heard of you?
Yeah.
Anything happened since the reports have aired?
They let me know that they were around by doing stupid, childish little things, but nothing serious, no.
You were worried about your life, though, for a while there, weren't you?
Yeah, that was one of the reasons to come on and, you know, let everything out on the air. It's a level of insurance.
One day when I was getting on Interstate 15, driving down Charleston Boulevard, a car came up alongside of me, and I thought he was just trying to race me to get on the freeway. This was after I had left the project. It was a white, boxy-looking car. Exactly what make and model, I don't know. But I accelerated to get on the freeway to go fast, and there was a gunshot, and the back of the car was hit, and I skidded off into the median. And I stopped, and I was frightened, and I just stood there because I thought the guy was going to be alongside of me and just shoot me. I had nothing to do. I was essentially paralyzed with fear, and I waited there, and then nothing else happened. It wasn't, I mean, it was an attempt on my life, but by who specifically, I don't know. Though I was threatened before I had left. They threatened my wife's life and my life, so I can only put two and two together and say that they were kind of pissed at me.
Well, they did that even in the original security briefings. They had guards there with M16s, the guys slamming their finger into my chest, screaming in my ear, some people pointing weapons at me. Like I said, it's not a good place to work.
That fear factor would surface later. Lazar agreed to undergo a polygraph exam as part of this report. Polygrapher Ron Slay asked about the technology Lazar had seen.
Did you knowingly lie when you said you had actually seen anti-gravity propulsion in operation?
No.
The results of this exam were inconclusive. Lazar appeared to be truthful on one test, deceitful on a second. Slay recommended that a second examiner be brought in. Polygrapher Terry Tavernetti runs a corporate security operation and is a former Los Angeles police officer. He put Lazar through 4 tests and concluded there was no attempt to deceive.
And I left there thinking that I feel we do have some credibility to what the subject had to say. And that's when I went to some of my colleagues.
Tavernetti sent the test results to a third polygrapher who agreed the results appeared truthful. The charts were then sent to a 4th examiner who did not agree, suggesting Lazar might be relating information he'd learned from someone else. The polygraphers conferred and decided they would not issue a final statement on truthfulness until more specific testing can be conducted, and that's where it stands. Tavernetti believes that difficulty in determining Lazar's truthfulness stems from the fear that was drilled into him.
I think we're talking about a subject here that is so far-reaching, and it is so emotional. And when you're dealing with emotions, this is polygraph, because we're dealing, in polygraph, you're looking at fear. The fear of getting caught telling a lie because something bad will happen to you if you do.
Well, I am telling the truth. I've tried to prove that. What's going on up there could be the most important event in history. You're talking about contact, physical contact and proof from another system, another planet, another intelligence. That's got to be the biggest event in history, period.
And it's real.
And it's real and it's there. And I had an extremely small part in it, but I'm convinced that what I saw is absolute proof of that. There is no way we could have created those systems. There's no way we could have made the discs, the power supplies, anything to go with them.
One of the investigators is still shaken by what he heard.
I was looking for all the little signs, the body language, if you will. There was tremendously positive eye contact. There was no fidgeting around, and he never deviated. We covered it several different ways. I asked the same question several different ways, and his answers were always the same. Hooking up, going through the test, then started the emotional roller coaster that I experienced that night. And it's something that I can honestly say has changed my whole outlook on things. We started the first test, and it went exactly the way I thought it might. He was not doing well. He was reacting to the relevant questions more than he was to the control type of questions, which is indicative of a person who is deceptive, because it's showing an emotion that he does not feel comfortable with his answers. These questions bother him. It was basically, have you ever observed a saucer-shaped craft fly out at Area 51? And that was asked, I think, 2 or 3 different times. The second chart we ran was on another question dealing with the gravity amplifier or an antimatter reactor as part of the powertrain. About halfway through that test, I'm looking down, and all of a sudden the realization sets in that I'm looking at a probable, truthful result. And I mean, I'm getting chills right now talking about it, because that's what I got. On every chart that I did, the one relevant question that was the same with every test was the last one. Have you deliberately lied to any question concerning the UFO information you've given me? And his answer of no was indicated as being truthful on the charts. So whatever he told me that night, Bob Lazar truly believes to be the truth.
Now, before you toss Lazar on the pile with all the other UFO wackos, understand that he willingly agreed to take a lie detector test, requested and independently arranged by a Las Vegas reporter. Terry Tavernetti is the ex-cop who administered the test.
If he's lying, he ought to be in Hollywood, because he gave absolutely no physiological indications of attempting deception.
Lazar says he was referred to his government job by Dr. Edward Teller. the renowned scientist who helped develop the atomic bomb. But in a rare interview with Inside Report, Teller insisted he doesn't know Lazar, or at least doesn't remember him.
I think it appears that someone's trying to wipe him out.
George Knapp is the Las Vegas TV reporter who first aired Bob Lazar's amazing claims. He says he ran into unusual problems just trying to look into Lazar's background. Though Lazar claimed to have once worked at the Los Alamos National Laboratory, government officials denied they knew anything about him. But when Knapp came up with a phone directory listing Lazar's name, Los Alamos grudgingly admitted he had spent some time there. Officials at the hospital where Lazar was born even denied the simple fact he was born there, until Knapp tracked down the doctor who delivered Lazar.
I find Bob to be credible, and the main reason is because the story hasn't changed. It's stayed from the beginning. It's been the same. It hasn't expanded like some of these UFO tales you hear. It's been the same, and we've been through a lot of different interview sessions, many on camera, many more off camera, and it stayed exactly the same, consistent.
But even inside the community of UFO believers, there are many who are skeptical of Bob Lazar's claims. Nuclear physicist Stanton Friedman says Lazar may indeed be the real thing, but he says he can also believe Lazar might be a hoaxer, or worse yet, a government agent spreading false stories designed to cover more important secrets.
I find Bob Lazar as somebody who isn't silly, who doesn't say totally stupid things, who comes across well. But I certainly, until I get verification, cannot endorse the legitimacy of what he is saying.
Bob Lazar says he quit his job working on the government saucers when his bosses began harassing him because he was letting others in on the big secret. But now that others are greeting his claims with skepticism and outright hostility, he says he wishes he just kept his big mouth shut. Lazar says he never took the idea of breaking security lightly. He just wanted to let the world in on a story he says we all should have been told.
Why keep a secret about probably one of the most important events in history, that there's been contact from an alien civilization? It's a significant event in history, more significant than anything.
I guess what I've heard most from the people who just don't buy the whole story is that, sure, maybe you worked at an area called S4, and maybe that it is a secret area, but what you were shown is stuff that we've made. That we made this 115, if it is 115, that we made the flying discs, that we made these antimatter reactors, because these are advances that you just don't know about.
Hardly.
Why not?
Well, the 115, it's impossible. I mean, that's, and the fact that the main job of everyone there is to find out how everything's made, I mean, that just contradicts everything right off the bat. The materials are completely alien to us, and just the overall idea of the project is, hey, can we duplicate this with materials that we have here? So obviously it was something that was found, or given for that matter, and we're just trying to duplicate it.
The 115, where do you suppose it came from then? I mean, what kind of an environment would that kind of
The only place that 115 could be made would have to be in a natural situation, somewhere maybe on the fringes of a supernova or somewhere around maybe a binary star system where there was more mass in the primordial mix of that system, where heavier elements would have had a chance to form when the stars were collapsing and there were huge amounts of energy being released, something along those lines. It has to be a naturally occurring element.
Element 115 is stable. And for those familiar with chemistry, we know that elements with higher atomic numbers have shorter and shorter half-lives. However, when you reach a certain point, they call it the island of stability. There is a place, and we've theorized this for a long time, somewhere around 114 to 116, there should be an area in there where the nucleus of the atom is geometrically stable with protons and neutrons, where it no longer decays. It's not radioactive. 115 is, in fact, this element. In fact, it does occur again somewhere around element 247. Of course, we're nowhere near synthesizing that. We can only, predict things like that. But that's where 115 is.
Did the aliens, give us element 115 in large quantities?
Whether or not it was given to us, I can't answer that question. However, I was told that we have 500 pounds by one of my coworkers. How it was obtained and where exactly it came from, I don't know. Whether it came in one of the crafts or with separate cargo somewhere, anyone can speculate. But I was told that was the figure.
You were able to get away with a sample of element 115. How much did you get away with?
No comment.
No, I'm talking about the 115.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't know. I have to think about how I'd...
What is the problem with this?
I don't want to get myself into more trouble by admitting something. So,
what's element 115?
Element 115 is a super heavy element. It's something that we only just recently synthesized. We only made 4 atoms of it, but the craft uses larger quantities of it, 223-gram little triangles of it. But it's a unique element. When it's exposed to radiation, it produces its own gravitational field, its own anti-gravitational field, and it's what's used to lift and propel the craft and create distortions around it. It's an amazing material. It just left a seed in my mind. I think at least one of them was part of an archaeological dig. So it's old. At least one of them is old. I don't know if it was the one I worked on, but I remember something to do with an archaeological dig.
Whoa.
So that means it's not just old, it's ancient. The craft that I worked on, that when it's going to travel a long distance, that is how it operates. It flies along and it puts its belly to the target and then brings all the amplifiers to power, and it shoots off in that direction. It doesn't fly as it would in the science fiction movies. It flies with the belly, the bottom forward.
If the description of a spacecraft tilting sounds familiar, take a look at the so-called gimbal UFO, a video released by the Pentagon in 2017. Naval pilots encountered a fleet of these unknown craft off the coast of Florida in 2015 and have since had dozens of similar encounters.
You saw antimatter reactors, you saw gravity propulsion systems in flying discs, flying saucers, you saw this element 115. You also read a series of reports that had other stunning information. Can you give an overview of the kinds of things that were in these reports?
The reason I didn't do that before was, first of all, they were just reports. Everything else I had hands-on experience with. Now, there was lots of strange information in the reports, but there again, it's just printed material, and it could be disinformation. I don't know. But certainly, the information I did read in the reports about the 115, the disagram, I mean, that all had, material that related to that. The reports went into aliens and even went along the lines of religious background.
Well, we should let our audience know. I mean, we discussed this when we were putting the series of reports together, whether to get into the alien thing or not, and we decided not to for the time being. It's not like you're hiding something from the audience or whatever. It was just a decision we made. But you did see reports, whether they're true or not, government reports about aliens. What were in the reports?
They had, well, there were photographs of aliens, there were autopsy reports. There was really a wealth of information, but there was, as far as what?
What do they look like?
The typical gray. I hate to say that gray. Like anyone knows what a typical gray is. It's a creature probably 3.5 to 4 feet tall, a large hairless head, black slanted eyes, long arms, very thin looking. I don't know how else I would describe it.
Well, what does an autopsy report look like? What's included in an autopsy report that you said you read?
The reason I call it an autopsy report is I saw the carcass, well, it was obviously a dead alien, the carcass cut up, and it was all dark inside, like it had an iron base. The reason I say iron is because it was very dark blood or whatever. I'm not a doctor, but it seemed to be one large organ in the body, as opposed to, an identifiable heart and lungs and that sort of thing, but just one gooey mess in there.
What did the report say? I mean, it had pictures. It had to have some words. Here's Exhibit A, an alien.
Essentially so. They had weights and densities of the organs. That there were no conclusions drawn, but just it was just a basic description of what the person who was cutting open the body saw.
Say where they came from?
Yeah, in one of the reports it said they came from reticulum 4, was what it said.
Where is that? Any idea?
Well, I'm told it's a star system in Zeta Reticuli. Reticulum is the constellation, and by reticulum 4 they meant the 4th planet out from that sun. In the same reports, we were identified, instead of saying Earth, we were identified as Sol 3, meaning the 3rd planet out from our sun.
If you look at all the information on, concerning my accounts, that's verifiable. It can't possibly be a bullshit story anymore. It's really way past that point.
Yeah.
There isn't a day I don't get emails, and I try and get this across to them. Look, I don't even want to talk about it anymore. Well, I don't believe the story. Great, pass it around. I really don't want you to, because it makes life difficult for me. I'm trying to do serious research. I've got contract with governments and other companies for R&D work, and aside from other scientific interests, and I want this divorced. Look, I know what happened is true. There's no doubt. Period. There's no delusion, and there are some things I can say that will bolster the case, and I'm not going to. It's going to stay that way. I do regret, at this point, bringing anything forward. Look, at the time, I'm in my early 20s. I went, you know what? This is a crime against the American people. This is just BS, and everybody deserves to know what's going on. And 25 years goes by, you get a little older, and your priorities change. And, what they told me is, this is a security matter, and really, what's the public going to do without this? You know how reactionary they are? There's a bunch of different reasons this is being kept quiet. Nothing that they bother telling me, but the bottom line is they're right. The bulk of the people are complete morons. And I'm sorry, maybe they are right. And this really should just be information that's handled out on a need-to-know basis to some people where it would benefit them.
And we'll tell you right up front that it's going to be hard to swallow at first.
Well, there's several, actually 9 flying saucers, flying discs that are out there of extraterrestrial origin.
It just left a seed in my mind. I think at least one of them was part of an archaeological dig. So it's old. At least one of them is old. I don't know if it was the one I worked on, but I remember something to do with an archaeological dig.
Well, I am telling the truth. I've tried to prove that. What's going on up there could be the most important event in history. You're talking about contact, physical contact and proof from another system, another planet, another intelligence. That's got to be the biggest event in history, period.
And it's real.
And it's real, and it's there.